The convent of Santa Maria della Grazia stood in quiet solitude, its ancient stone walls a testament to the devotion of those who had chosen a life of faith. Within its sacred halls, Sister Isabella had embraced her calling with unwavering conviction. Her days were marked by prayer, service, and the quiet fulfillment of a life devoted to something greater than herself. Yet, fate has a way of stirring the past. One ordinary afternoon, as the convent prepared for a charity event, the heavy wooden doors opened to reveal a face she never expected to see again. Luca. Time had changed him, yet his presence carried the weight of everything she had left behind. He had been her first love, a love she had once thought would last forever. But that was a different life, a different Isabella. She had chosen faith, made vows, and built a life within these walls. And yet, as their eyes met, something stirred deep within her. A memory, a whisper of emotions buried beneath years of devotion. They worked side by side, arranging supplies and preparing for the event, but every interaction carried an unspoken tension. The past lingered between them, pressing against the present. One evening, under the quiet glow of the setting sun, Luca finally spoke the words she had feared. "I never stopped loving you." Her breath caught, but she stood firm. "That life is behind me, Luca. My heart belongs to God now." Yet, when he gently reached for her hand, she did not pull away. And in that fleeting moment, the past and present collided, a silent battle between love and duty. As the night deepened, Isabella faced the truth. Love was not about possession, but about sacrifice. And so, with a heavy heart, she let him go. Luca left the convent the next morning, carrying with him the memory of a love that would never fade. And Isabella, though shaken, found peace in knowing that true love is not always about holding on, but about having the strength to let go. Every morning, Isabella rose before the sun, joining her fellow sisters in prayer. The convent of Santa Maria della Grazia was her home, a place where she had found purpose and peace. The rhythmic chants of morning hymns filled the air, their melody a reminder of the life she had chosen. Her days were spent tending to the garden, nurturing the plants as she nurtured her soul. She cared for the sick, offering gentle hands and soft-spoken prayers to those who sought refuge within the convent's walls. She prepared meals for the less fortunate, finding joy in the act of giving. The simplicity of life here grounded her, allowing her to focus on the path she had vowed to follow. And yet, even in the stillness, memories lingered. There were nights when sleep eluded her, and in the quiet of her room, she found herself recalling a different time, one filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of her own heart beating for someone else. A life before the convent, a life with Luca. She could still picture his smile, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of his dreams. He had been her first love, the kind that feels endless in its intensity. They had once walked through sun-drenched streets, hands entwined, speaking of a future they thought was certain. But certainty had faded when Isabella felt a different calling, one that led her away from him and into the embrace of faith. The decision had been painful, but she believed it was right. She had promised herself, promised God, that she would dedicate her life to a higher purpose. Yet, no vow could erase the past. Some nights, as she gazed at the moon through the convent's arched windows, she wondered, had Luca moved on? Did he think of her? Or had she become just a distant memory, a story from another time? She shook off the thoughts, retreating to prayer. Her faith was her anchor, and she clung to it, even when her heart whispered of what once was. But fate has a way of testing the soul. The day would soon come when the past would no longer be confined to memory. A familiar face would walk through the convent doors, and everything Isabella had buried would rise to the surface once more. The convent buzzed with quiet energy as the sisters prepared for the charity event. Baskets were being filled with food and supplies, carefully arranged for the children at the orphanage. Isabella focused on her work, her hands steady as she tied ribbons around parcels. The event was important, an act of service that reflected the very foundation of her faith. Then, she stepped into the main hall, and everything shifted. She stopped abruptly, her breath catching in her throat. Luca. He stood near the entrance, speaking with the Mother Superior. Years had passed, yet he was unmistakable. His presence was both familiar and foreign, time having softened the youthful features she once knew. He carried himself differently now, more assured, more composed, but his eyes held the same warmth, the same quiet intensity that had once drawn her in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to pause, leaving only the weight of unspoken memories between them. Then, the Mother Superior broke the silence. "Isabella, this is Luca. He'll be helping us with the fundraiser." Her name on his lips felt strange, a whisper of a life she had left behind. Luca smiled gently, his voice steady yet laced with something deeper. "It's been a long time." She forced herself to nod, to push away the emotions rising within her. "Yes," she said, her voice composed, though her heart was anything but. "A very long time." The air between them held the echoes of all that had been left unsaid. Isabella kept her posture firm, her expression unreadable, but within her, a storm brewed. She had thought herself prepared for anything, but she had never imagined this. Luca was here, in the very place where she had built her new life. And with his presence came a past she had spent years trying to put to rest. The days unfolded in quiet rhythm, each moment a careful balance between duty and restraint. Isabella kept her focus on the work at hand, ensuring the charity event would run smoothly. But no matter how much she tried, she couldn't ignore the fact that she was spending more time with Luca than she had anticipated. They worked side by side, organizing supplies, coordinating schedules, and discussing logistics. Conversations remained polite, practical, until small moments of familiarity began to slip through the cracks. One afternoon, as they sorted through boxes of donated clothes, Luca suddenly chuckled. "Remember when we tried to bake a cake for my mother's birthday?" he said, glancing at her with amusement. "You nearly burned down the kitchen." Isabella paused, caught off guard by the memory. Then, before she could stop herself, she laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. "I had no idea what I was doing," she admitted, shaking her head. Luca grinned. "No, you didn't. But you insisted on making it yourself. I think we spent half the night scraping burnt batter out of the pan." She smiled, a warmth settling in her chest. It was such a simple moment, yet it carried the weight of something far greater. For a brief second, she was no longer Sister Isabella. She was just Isabella, the girl who once loved a boy named Luca, the girl who had dreamed of a different kind of future. She quickly looked away, focusing on the stack of neatly folded clothes before her. "This event is important," she said, bringing the conversation back to safer ground. "The children at the orphanage need all the help they can get." Luca studied her for a moment, as if recognizing the shift. He nodded, his expression soft but unreadable. "Yes," he said, "they do." The moment passed, and they returned to their work. But deep inside, something had changed. A door she thought had been sealed long ago had cracked open, just enough to remind her of the life she had once known. The garden was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the scent of blooming jasmine lingering in the air. Isabella's hands brushed over the petals of a nearby rosebush as she let the quiet settle around her. This place had always been her refuge, a space where she could think, where the noise of the world faded away. But tonight, the silence felt different. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned. Luca stood a few steps away, his expression unreadable. His hands were tucked into his pockets, but there was a weight in his stance, as if he carried something too heavy to bear alone. "I need to say something," he said. His voice was steady, yet she could hear the hesitation beneath it. She didn't speak, only waited. Luca took a slow breath. "I never stopped thinking about you," he admitted. "Not for a single day." Her fingers curled at her sides. She had expected this, perhaps even feared it, but hearing the words still sent a tremor through her heart. "Luca," she began, her voice softer than she intended. "I know your life is here now," he continued before she could say more. "I know you made a choice, but I need you to know that I still love you." The words settled between them, heavy with everything left unsaid. Isabella closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying herself against the rush of emotions threatening to surface. "I chose this life because I felt it was right," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "My faith is my path now." Luca let out a slow exhale, his gaze searching hers. He wasn't here to change her mind. He knew better than that, but he had needed to say it. He nodded, accepting her words even as they cut deep. "I understand," he murmured, "but I couldn't leave without telling you." The ache in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in years, Isabella allowed herself to feel the weight of what they had lost. She took a step closer, her fingers grazing the edge of her habit as if anchoring herself to the life she had chosen. "Thank you," she said, the words barely above a whisper. Luca offered a small, wistful smile. "Goodbye, Isabella." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing beneath the darkening sky, her heart both heavy and resolute. The convent was silent, the only sound the distant rustling of trees as a gentle breeze moved through the courtyard. Isabella had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet the thoughts racing through her mind. Sleep would not come. Without thinking, she found herself slipping out of her small room, drawn once more to the garden. The moon hung high, casting a soft glow over the flowers, illuminating the stone pathways she had walked so many nights before. She wasn't alone. Luca stood near the fountain, hands resting on the cool stone edge. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, offering a small, knowing smile. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. For a while, they walked in silence. There was something comforting in the unspoken understanding between them, as if neither wanted to break the fragile peace of the moment. Then, Luca stopped. "Isabella," his voice was quiet, uncertain. "If things had been different, do you think we could have had a future together?" She hesitated, her heart tightening at the question. "I don't know," she admitted. Luca took a small step closer, his gaze searching hers. "I'm not asking you to change your life. He didn't finish. Instead, he leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. And then, for the briefest of moments, their lips met. It was soft, filled with years of longing, of memories neither could forget. A question without an answer. A love that had never truly faded. But as soon as it happened, Isabella pulled away, her breath unsteady. "I can't," she whispered. "I made a promise." Luca's expression didn't change. He had known, deep down, what her answer would be. He nodded, his voice barely above a murmur. "I'll leave tomorrow." Her chest ached, but she didn't move, didn't reach for him. "It's for the best," she said, though the words felt hollow. Luca held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned, disappearing into the night. Isabella stood alone beneath the moonlight, her heart heavy, but her resolve unshaken. The rain had begun to fall softly in the early hours of the morning, casting a gentle mist over the convent grounds. The stone pathways glistened, and the air was cool and fresh. Yet Isabella felt a heaviness in her chest as she made her way to the courtyard. She had known this moment would come, but somehow, it still felt like an unexpected blow. There, standing by the gate, was Luca. His back was to her, but even from a distance, she could see the quiet sadness in the way he held himself. The supplies he had helped organize for the charity event were packed away, and he was ready to leave. Isabella approached slowly, each step feeling as though it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. When she reached him, she cleared her throat, her voice calm yet filled with an undercurrent of emotion. "Thank you for everything you've done for the convent," she said, her eyes meeting his. The words came easily, but the feelings beneath them were anything but. Luca turned, a faint, bittersweet smile crossing his face. "And thank you," he replied softly, his voice carrying a depth of sincerity. "Thank you for being the person who taught me what love really means." The silence that followed felt heavy. Neither knew what more to say, the words already hanging in the air, like the rain above them. It wasn't the first time they had shared such moments. Moments when words failed to capture the fullness of their emotions. For a long moment, they simply stood there, caught in the bittersweetness of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Finally, Luca broke the silence. He nodded, then turned away, walking slowly toward the gates. His footsteps were soft on the rain-soaked stones, each one seeming to echo with the distance between them. Isabella stayed where she was, watching him. She didn't move, didn't call out. There was nothing left to say, no more decisions to make. She watched him disappear beyond the gates, his figure blending with the mist. A part of her wanted to run after him, to call his name, to hold on to the past for just a moment longer. But she didn't. She knew it would do neither of them any good. Deep inside, she felt something shift, a quiet understanding taking root. Her heart had belonged to him once, but it had always belonged to something greater than him, or anyone else. Her heart belonged to her faith, to the vow she had made. Isabella stood there in the rain, letting the cool droplets fall against her skin. The ache in her chest would eventually fade, but the peace she had found in her faith would remain, as constant as the steady rhythm of the rain. That evening, the convent's simple chapel was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Isabella stood before her fellow sisters, her heart full, her spirit calm. The days had been long, and the decisions weighty, but tonight, as she prepared to speak, there was a sense of clarity that surrounded her. The memory of Luca, the love they had shared, and the pain of letting go still lingered in her heart, but she had come to understand its deeper meaning. As she looked out over the quiet faces of her sisters, Isabella's voice rang out with quiet strength. "Love is one of the greatest gifts we can experience," she began, her words carrying a depth of understanding. "But sometimes, love asks us to let go. It does not mean it wasn't real. It means we trust that there is a greater purpose." Her words echoed in the stillness of the room, touching each sister in a different way. For some, they were a reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of faith. For others, they were a confirmation that love was not always something to hold onto tightly, but something to release with grace. Isabella's heart swelled as she spoke. She knew the truth of her words now more than ever. Loving Luca had been one of the most beautiful, transformative experiences of her life. But it had also shown her that love, in its truest form, wasn't about holding on to another person. It was about understanding that love could be given freely, without the need for possession. As she spoke, a sense of peace settled over her. She had made the right choice. Her love for Luca had not been in vain. It had shaped her, helped her grow, and led her to a deeper understanding of what true love really was. Meanwhile, miles away, Luca stood at the doorstep of a small orphanage. The sky was gray, the air crisp with the approach of winter, but there was a warmth inside him that had been absent for a long time. He had come to offer his help, time, resources, whatever was needed to support these children who had little but their hope. As he stepped inside, he was greeted with the eager smiles of children who had nothing, yet offered so much. They didn't know who he was, didn't know the story that had brought him here. But in their eyes, he saw something that reminded him of Isabella. Selflessness, love without strings attached. And in that moment, Luca understood. True love isn't about possession or clinging to the past. It's about being willing to give, to sacrifice, and to support others without expecting anything in return. Loving Isabella had taught him that. Their love had been beautiful, but it was fleeting. Yet, it had shaped him, guided him towards something more meaningful than his own desires. As he spent time at the orphanage, helping wherever he could, Luca felt a renewed sense of purpose. Though the ache of their goodbye still lingered in his chest, he knew that it had led him here, to a place where his actions could make a difference in the lives of others. Back at the convent, Isabella never saw Luca again. Time passed, and life continued in its quiet rhythm. But in the stillness of her prayers, Isabella often thought of him. She prayed for his peace, for his purpose, and for his heart. Though they had parted ways, the love they shared remained a part of her, a reminder of the beauty in loving without holding on. And each time she prayed for him, a deep sense of peace washed over her. There was no bitterness, no regret, only the quiet assurance that love, in its purest form, transcends distance, time, and circumstances. Their love had not been in vain. It had shaped them both, strengthened their spirits, and led them toward a greater understanding of what it meant to love selflessly. A love that didn't require possession to be real. A love that, in its own way, had lasted forever. Isabella had chosen her path, and Luca had chosen his. But the love they had shared had left an indelible mark on both their hearts, a love that lived on, not in the ways they once imagined, but in the ways they had grown, in the lives they now touched. And in this, they had found something far more profound than anything they could have held on to. A love that was boundless, a love that was eternal,